Okay, class, so I welcome you back to another important lecture. And for today's class, we would be talking about the sense organs. Now, if you were to recall some of the concept from the previous classes, so you know that we have got this change in the environment, and this was a stimulus, and the stimulus has to be detected. So whenever our body tries to be detecting this stimulus, then that stimulus has to be detected by the specialized cells that we have in our body, and these specialized cells they are referred to as the receptors. We say in these receptors what they would do that they would not only detect the change in the environment but would also convert that change into a signal, and that would be an electrical impulse with us. And in our body, these group of the receptor cells, when they cluster together or when they group together, then they would make some specific organs in our body, and those specific organs they would be responsible for initiating the electrical impulse transmission to the respective neurons that we have in the nervous coordination and the response thing. So if I were to quickly take you to the various sense organs that we have and to what they would be sensitive and what sense they would be developing in our body. So among the sense organ, the first one that we have is the skin with us. And whenever if someone tries to exert the pressure or when you touch some hot object or the cold object, and as well as the pain kind of a thing. So these thin skin that we have is sensitive to all of it. So in terms of the sensation that this provides, so it would be the touch and the temperature. Likewise, if I were to talk about the tongue that we have, that is a part of the alimentary canal. So this is sensitive to any of the chemicals that we have in the food and drink. And you would learn in your higher classes that in the food the chemicals they are dissolved, and in the tongue we have some receptors, and they would bind to the chemicals that are dissolved in the food and the drink, and then ultimately we would get this sensation of the taste, we say. Likewise, the nose that we have, again, they have some, you could say, got some receptors in them. They are the chemoreceptors, and they are sensitive to any of the chemicals that would be available in the air, and by that, we develop this ability of the smell because of the nose. Likewise, if we were to talk about the ears that we have with us, so they are sensitive to the sound and the movement, and you know from the very basic classes that they would give us this ability of the hearing and also the balance situation. And the major organ that we have to discuss in this chapter, so this is eye, and you know, eye is an organ that is very sensitive to the light and the kind of the sense that it would be developing in our body. So this is the sight, we say. Now we must know that what role do these receptor cells have in the sense organs. So for that, I would recall the previous concept that this is like the skin I have got present on the outside of my hand. That is one specific sense organ, and in them we have these receptors here. So whenever we are exposed to some stimulus, as in this case, this is some pointed object. So these group of the receptor cells that we have in the sense organs, so they would be generating an electrical impulse out of that, and from here it would go on toward the sensory neuron. From the sensory it would come to the relay or intermediate neuron, and from there we would carry it to the motor neuron, and that motor neuron would ultimately be giving the information to the muscles or the glands of the body, and in that impact the muscles would contract, and the glands that you have got, so they would be giving some kind of a chemical secretion to what we refer to this as a hormone, we say, and this is how our body would be developing a response. So if I were to take you to the explanation of this that you are required to be writing in your exam, so in terms of the role of the receptor, as we have seen that in the sense organ we have these receptor cells and they are there in the sense organ, and when they would be stimulated by the change in the environment, so these receptor cells are the ones that would generate the electrical impulse, and from there, as I have said, that they would go to the sensory neuron that would carry it to the CNS, and we know in the CNS we have this relay neuron lying, and in the sense, in the CNS, in the brain and the spinal cord, the response would be decided, and then it would be passed from the relay neuron to this motor neuron, and ultimately that motor neuron would carry the electrical impulse to the effectors that have the muscle and the gland in it, and in that impact or in that influence, the effector of my body, they would be producing a response to that change whatsoever we were exposed to. So here we are, we have to make a grip on toward the structure of the eye. As I have mentioned before, that eye is that specialized sense organ and it has a receptor cells and they are sensitive to the light, and we have to be having the vision and the sense of sight, because if we would not have it, then you see we would be blind and we cannot be well adapted to be living in our external environment. Now, what we have to assess first is that how come the eyes that we have got, they look from the outside. Like when you just literally look into the eye of some person, then you see that in the eye we have got here the eyelids, and in the eyelids we have these eyelashes with us, isn't it? And then you see that the entire surface of the eye, all of it. So this is covered by a transparent covering or a transparent layer, and that transparent layer is what we refer to this as conjunctiva. And other thing is that at the very center of the eye, we have got this minute opening and this narrow kind of the opening that we have with us. So this would be the pupil, and that pupil is actually something that would control that how much amount of the light it would enter on the inside of the eye. And this pupil that we have, so this is surrounded by the muscles here, and these muscles, they are the muscles of the iris, and we will see later in a while that these iris muscles are the ones that would control the dilation of the pupil or the constriction of the pupil, so that the amount of the light that is entering into the eyes, it could be regulated. So if I were to quickly tell you that how much of the structures that we have got in the eye, so we have this cornea, we have iris, we have lens, we have retina, we have the optic nerve. So these are the major structures that lie in the eye. But overall, if I were to tell you that how many of the total layers we have in case of this sense organs, among the major layers, the first layer that we have with us, so this is the sclera with us. And after sclera, we have got the second layer, which is the middle layer of the eye, and that would be entitled as the choroid. And then we have got the innermost photosensitive layer of the eye, and that would be the retina with me. And this cornea actually is there in the sclera. The iris that we have got is there in the choroid, and the lens also is associated with the choroid layer. The retina, you see that this is the innermost photosensitive layer of the eye, and to the retina, there is connectivity of the nerve, which is the optic nerve, and that would carry the electrical impulses from here in the retina to the brain. So if I just bring you to be understanding the internal structures of the eye, so if you were to see clearly, like this is the outermost layer of the eye that I have got with me, that was appearing as the white part. So this is the sclera. So the sclera is not entirely round, but rather than it becomes bulged at the front. You see, like I don't have this round, but rather than this is getting a little bulged out. So this outer bulge part that we have for the sclera. So this is what we entitled it as the cornea. And as I have mentioned above, that the surface of the eye is covered by this transparent layer that we have present on an entire covering of the eye. So this was referred to as the conjunctiva. Okay, and sclera is actually this whitish part of the eye only, and at the front, this bulge part of the sclera is the cornea. Now, moving onward here, if you were to look clearly, so in the center we have got this middle layer of the eye, and this middle layer of the eye is referred to as a choroid. And if you see that this choroid kind of bends behind what? The cornea of the eye, because you see this is the cornea with me, and this you could say the end of this choroid is getting bent in the back of this cornea, and in this bend of the choroid we have got two pairs of the muscles. This pair of the muscle that I have with me, so this is referred to as the ciliary body, or we also call this as the ciliary muscles. And out of the ciliary muscles, if I were to zoom in more, so there would be the presence of these ligaments, and these ligaments, they are the suspensory ligaments, we say. And these suspensory ligaments, they would go further and they would attach themselves to this convex lens that we have got naturally inside of our eyes. For the choroid, the thing doesn't end here, because this was the first band of the muscles that I have in the choroid, and the other band that we have in the choroid here. So this is entitled as the iris, and you see that here we have got these irises, and in between the irises we have this opening coming here, and this opening is what we were referring to this as the pupil, that even is visible when we try to look into someone's eye, and this pupil would actually be regulating that how much amount of the light we would allow it to enter into the eyes or we do not allow them to enter into the eyes. Now, the time when we place the, you could say, lens here, so we get to form two cavities inside of our eye. Now, this is the first cavity that is being formed between the cornea and between the lens. So this is referred to as the aqueous humor, and this has got a water-like consistency. Likewise, if I were to go beyond to be telling you the second, you could say, cavity that is being formed, so it lies here. So this again is a kind of a fluid-filled space, and this is referred to as a vitreous humor, and its consistency is jelly-like. Now, if we go on the very inside of the eye, so here we have the innermost photosensitive layer of the eye, and this innermost photosensitive layer of the eye that we have with us. So this is entitled as the retina, and in the retina we see a little bulge, a dip into it, and this little bulge or the dip that we have, not the bulge, but rather than the dip that we have, a depression that we have in this. So this is called as the fovea centralis. And at any cost, we would like to carry the electrical impulses or the signals from this retina to the brain of my body. So for that, we have got this optic nerve with us, and this optic nerve would have some neurons in it, and these neurons, they would be taking the information from here, from the retina, and then ultimately into the brain. Now, another scenario is that the point where this optic nerve is entering into the brain, so we have this spot with us, and the spot is termed as either the blind spot or the yellow spot. Why we call this as a blind spot? Because we will see later that in the retina we have the cones and the rod cells. But in the blind spot, there would be no presence of the cones and the rod cells. So I hope you would be clear now for what the sense organs are, what receptors are, how come the group of the receptors they make a sense organ, and how come the eye that we have this looks like, and how come we are able to be understanding the internal structures that we have on the inside of the eye. So for the next lecture, we will see that how come this iris that we have, this is responsible for controlling the size of the pupil, and how come these suspensory ligaments and the ciliary bodies that we have here, how they would regulate the size of this lens in terms of the accommodation scenario. So see you in the next lecture.